Chapter 8. Emotional Tension. The alien dimension had a strange way of warping time. Days bled into weeks, and Ichigo and Orihime grew more accustomed to their swapped body. They still bickered, still teased each other, but beneath the surface, something subtle had started to shift. It wasn't just the way Ichigo started noticing how effortlessly Orihime moved in his body, or how Orihime found herself watching Ichigo with a growing sense of admiration, though that was definitely part of it. It was the quiet moments between them, the ones where they let their guards down, that began to feel different. Ichigo wasn't sure when it started exactly, but he'd caught himself staring at Orihime more than once. It wasn't intentional, or so he told himself, but there was something about the way she carried herself in his body that he couldn't ignore. She was confident, strong, and surprisingly graceful, despite the occasional mishap. And then there was Orihime. Despite the awkwardness of her new form, she couldn't help but notice how cute Ichigo looked sometimes. She knew it was weird to think of her own body that way, but the way Ichigo blushed, the way he fumbled with his long hair or grumbled about his clothes, it was endearing in a way she hadn't expected. Neither of them dared to say anything, of course. Admitting those thoughts out loud would only make things more awkward, so they both settled for pretending nothing had changed. Poorly. The tension between them was becoming increasingly obvious, even during their daily routine. Ichigo, for instance, had developed a sudden and inexplicable obsession with sharpening sticks. "Why are you still doing that?" Orihime asked one afternoon, watching as Ichigo sat by the fire, furiously whittling a branch down to a fine point. "It's useful," Ichigo said, avoiding her gaze. Orihime arched an eyebrow. "You've already made like 10 spears. Are we starting a weapons collection?" Ichigo grumbled something under his breath and continued carving. He wasn't about to admit that he was avoiding looking at her. Specifically, avoiding looking at her while she stretched. Because, apparently, Orihime had decided that stretching was a vital part of their survival routine. "Flexibility is important," she'd said cheerfully that morning, bending her body in ways Ichigo didn't think were physically possible. He'd made the mistake of glancing at her once, only to immediately look away, his ears burning. "You're such a weirdo," he muttered, trying to focus on the stick in his hands. Orihime grinned, resting her chin on her palm. "You're just mad because I'm better at stretching than you." "Oh, please," Ichigo shot back. "You're using a body that's built for that stuff. I'd like to see you try it in my body." Orihime flexed her arm, her grin widening. "I'd rather use this body to lift heavy things and punch stuff. It's more fun." Ichigo rolled his eyes. "Yeah, well, try not to punch me next time." Later that day, Orihime had her own moment of awkwardness. She'd been gathering firewood when Ichigo walked over, his long hair tied back in a messy ponytail. He was wearing her old clothes, shorts that barely covered his thighs and a tank top that hugged her curves. And for some reason Orihime felt her face heat up. You okay?" Ichigo asked, noticing her staring. Orihime blinked, quickly looking away. Yeah, I was just, thinking about trees." Ichigo frowned. "Trees? Yay! Trees are great. Very tree-like." Ichigo gave her a weird look, but didn't press the subject. Orihime, meanwhile, mentally smacked herself. "What is wrong with me? That's my body. Stop being weird." That evening, as the sun dipped below the alien horizon, They sat by the campfire, the flickering flames casting soft shadows on their faces. It was one of those rare quiet moments, the kind where neither of them felt the need to fill the silence with banter. Orihime stared into the fire, her expression thoughtful. "Ichigo," she said softly. "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah, sure," Ichigo replied, poking at the fire with a stick. "Do you ever feel like you're not good enough?" Ichigo looked up, surprised by the question. "What are you talking about? Of course not. You're..." He stopped himself, realizing she wasn't talking about him. "Wait. Do you feel that way?" Orihime hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes. I've always wanted to protect everyone, but most of the time, I feel like I'm the one being protected, like I'm a burden." Ichigo frowned, setting his stick down. "That's not true. You've saved us more times than I can count. And you saved me?" Orihime looked at him, her eyes wide. "I did." "Yeah," Ichigo said, his voice serious. "Back in Wekamundo. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have made it out of there. You're stronger than you think, Orihime." Orihime smiled softly, her heart swelling at his words. "Thank you, Ichigo." For a moment, they just sat there, the warmth of the fire, and the quiet hum of the alien world surrounding them. "What about you?" Orihime asked suddenly. "Do you ever feel that way?" Ichigo hesitated, his gaze dropping to the flames. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Everyone expects me to have all the answers, to be the strong one. But there are times when I don't, when I'm just as scared as everyone else." Orihime reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "You don't have to carry everything by yourself, you know. You've got people who care about you, people who want to help." Ichigo glanced at her, a small smile tugging at his lip. "Yeah, I know." As the evening wore on, the air between them seemed to shift. Orihime found herself watching Ichigo again, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't quite explain. "Hey, Ichigo," she said softly, leaning slightly closer to him. "Yeah." She hesitated, her cheeks warming. "I think I..." A loud crashing noise interrupted her, shattering the moment. Both of them jumped to their feet, grabbing their makeshift weapons. "What was that?" Orihime whispered, her eyes scanning the darkness. "I don't know," Ichigo muttered, stepping in front of her protectively. They crept toward the source of the noise, their hearts pounding. When they reached the edge of their camp, they froze. Large clawed footprints were pressed into the dirt, leading away into the trees. "Those weren't there before," Orihime said, her voice shaky. Ichigo tightened his grip on his spear. "Looks like we're not alone."